Minnesota is changing the guidelines on COVID-19 quarantine time. Health officials say that in some situations, it's okay to quarantine for less than 14 days. The change puts Minnesota in line with CDC guidelines that were announced last week. Officials stressed a 14-day quarantine after exposure to COVID-19 is still the safest and best option. But in the hopes of getting more people to quarantine, the CDC and state now say a 10-day quarantine with no symptoms or a 7-day quarantine coupled with a negative test after day 5 would be okay. But as Esme Murphy reports, these new guidelines come with a warning that anytime you quarantine less than 14 days, there are risks.
The science hasn't changed.
The governor and state health officials stress that a 14-day quarantine after exposure is still the ideal and that you can still get COVID through 14 days.
The risk of a person becoming infected while they are in quarantine is highest in the earliest days of their quarantine, and their risk of being infectious tends to wane as that 14 days goes by.
The goal is by lessening the number of quarantine days, more people will actually quarantine.
The science has not changed. It's just a refinement to make sure that we can get higher compliance to break that spread of transmission.
But if you go with the shorter quarantine, you need to be extra careful for the full 14 days.
You will continue to watch out for possible symptoms through day 14. You also need to continue to mask, maintain at least 6-foot social distance, and follow other prevention guidance.
And the shorter quarantines are not recommended when the exposure is from someone in your own household.
This is because it's difficult for household members to quarantine separately from other household members.
The governor's current pause that includes bans on indoor restaurant dining, keeping gyms closed, and even limits on small household gatherings is set to expire on December 18th. The governor says he will announce later this week if he will extend those restrictions through the Christmas and New Year's holidays. In St. Paul, Esme Murphy, WCCO 4 News.
And the governor says tomorrow he will announce Minnesota's schedule for the rollout of the very first COVID vaccines. We do have a link to the new COVID quarantine guidelines from the Minnesota Department of Health on our website.